Welcome to a new Daily Top Askreddit video. Today's topic.
What criminal committed an almost perfect crime and what was the thing that messed it up? The Dunbar armored robbery. The largest cash heist in US history. A six-man inside job to rob an armored cash depot. They set up a house party as an alibi. Used the keys to get into the cafeteria. And waited in there until all employees came in on break. Then ambushed and subdued them without firing a shot or raising an alarm. They then loaded the money bags, with over $18 million, into a U-Haul, destroyed the CCTV tapes and returned to the party. Then they sat on the money for 6 months before hiring a crooked lawyer to set up a real estate money laundering scheme to avoid suspicion. 2 years after the robbery, one of the men paid a real estate broker with a stack of money still wrapped in the original currency strap. The broker immediately reported it to the police. After being arrested, he cracked under interrogation, confessed to the robbery, and ratted out his partners. Edit. All the men have since finished their prison sentences. And most of the money was never found. So there's a chance they still won in the end. That's an incredibly stupid way to get caught. It is, but it's also not that surprising. Most of us do really stupid things at least occasionally. These 6 guys would have had to make it their entire lives without any one of them doing anything really stupid. That one dude who robbed a bank by hiring a bunch of people from Craigslist to show up wearing the same outfit he was and wait outside, he would have gotten away, but a homeless man saw him do a practice run the day before and after the robbery told the police. DB. Tuber was the name the press gave him as he escaped on an inner tube down a creek. Anthony Kersey is his name and he wrote a book that was very interesting. He planned his robbery for months. He planned to use pepper spray to subdue one of the guards. And to convince himself it would work, he pepper sprayed himself. He also moved boulders out of the creek for months before to make sure his escape path was clear. Tubing down a river seems like a terrible getaway plan. You couldn't possibly think of a more predictable mode of transportation. Israel Keyes is almost certainly the smartest serial killer that has been caught. He studied past serial killers and how they were caught, and so Keyes targeted random people all across the United States to avoid detection with months of planning before he committed a particular crime. He specifically went for campgrounds and isolated locations. He claimed to only use guns when he had to and preferred strangulation. Keyes planned murders long ahead of time and took extraordinary action to avoid detection. Unlike most serial killers, he did not have a victim profile, saying he chose a victim randomly. On his murder trips, he kept his mobile phone turned off and paid for items with cash. He had no connection to any of his known victims. For the Courier murders, Keyes flew to Chicago, where he rented a car to drive 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers, to Vermont. He then used the murder kit he had hidden 2 years earlier to perform the murders. He was only caught because he kidnapped a girl and tried to get ransom money from her parents, and law enforcement tracked him down via withdrawals from her bank account and the car he was seen abducting her in on security cameras. The FBI does not even know how many people he killed, so who knows how long he could have kept it up if he had chosen to continue his usual killings. The scariest part about these stories is you don't know who the best serial killers are. You see so many people who got caught over something stupid, which tells me that there are many people who didn't do something stupid to get themselves caught. Especially medical workers. There are so many ways to make it look like someone just let go of life. Oh, I have an interesting story about him. I bartended at a place in Anchorage. I would be the last one to leave every night. The parking lot in the back was huge, as the building my bar was in was also an office building. One night, a white pickup truck was parked 10 spaces away from mine in an empty parking lot and a dude was sitting in it. He looked at me and just stared. Not weird. I just kind of noticed it and left for the night. That truck and the dude were there every night for 2 weeks. After the first few days, I started getting weird vibes from it and started asking my dishwasher to walk me out at the end of the night in exchange for a couple beers after work. One night, the truck just stopped showing up. The next day, he's arrested for killing a girl he kidnapped from a coffee shop down the road from my bar. It turned out that he lived on the street behind me at the time. And the truck they put on the news was the truck in the parking lot. And the weird dude in the truck looked remarkably similar to Keyes. Shit scares me to this day. Or not the next day. I should have said, shortly after. That Australian kid who hacked the FBI and put his photos on their website. He scrubbed the metadata from the photo so it wouldn't show the GPS location. Then he accidentally uploaded the original with that information still on it. That crime kinda sounds like it should barely be a crime, or at least turn into a job offer. Assuming he only hacked the site to prove he could, and wasn't trying to get in the way of FBI investigations. I'm guessing a kid who could hack their site shows great promise. Though being Australian, he couldn't actually work for them. If a crime is objectively funny, it shouldn't be a crime. The guy who created the Silk Road gave himself away by initially introducing the Silk Road to the world from an email address that would ultimately lead investigators right to him. Watch the documentary on this, it was absolutely fascinating. What's it called, if you don't mind? I think logging into his laptop as public place was his mistake, because even if he would have gotten caught, there was no way, at least very hard, to put him behind bars without he logging into his laptop and giving it to investigators. Yeah, he got caught because he used the Wi-Fi at a local library. A male and female FBI agent pretended to be a married couple having an intense argument. When he looked up from his laptop at them, the man tackled him and the woman grabbed the laptop before he could shut it. The Antwerp diamond heist. The perfect heist of the century, where an Italian gang stole 100 million in gems. While leaving Antwerp, they disposed of the disguises and the tools used. But one member of the gang was too lazy to burn everything as instructed. Among the rubbish, the police found envelopes of the Antwerp Diamond Center and a receipt for a sandwich bought at a store close to the center. They recovered video footage of the sandwich store and busted the mastermind of the heist, who didn't give up his mates. But some were later identified. Some of the stolen diamonds are still unaccounted for. Ugh. Group projects. Wolfgang Belari, he made millions with forged paintings he painted all himself. He was ultimately caught because he once accidentally used paint that contained a very slight amount of a substance that wasn't used in the days of the original painter. If you're going to deceive people using forged artwork, at least go the route of Hans van Meegeren's selling, trading them to screw with Hermann Göring. But he was found a similar way. A substance that was a major component of his paint mixtures was a 20th century invention. Van Meegeren's court case account is rather funny and interesting to me. It was found that he had sold a few of his forgeries to the Nazis. Right. And was subsequently court-martialed after the war for colluding with the Nazis by apparently selling genuine Vermeers to them. Had to prove and ended up proving his innocence by painting a good forgery right there in the courtroom. I get that selling priceless artwork would be a highly coveted goal. But if you can recreate an exact copy so well that it takes a chemical test on the paint itself to notice the difference, is there not a creative bone in his entire body? He didn't copy paintings, he imitated the artist's style and created original, lost, paintings. The Friday night bank robber was the most prolific bank robber in US history. I believe he had a master's degree in something analytical like math. Was a martial arts instructor. He figured out there's a time of the year in the Northeast where it would be dark out just before the banks closed. He used motorcycles to drive through the woods to these banks and rode it back through the woods to a U-Haul truck he had waiting and would put the bike into the truck and drive away calmly. He did this for a long time, kind of like the robbers in the movie Point Break. He would stop for the rest of the year, which had the police really guessing. They couldn't figure out patterns for a long time. Years later, the police started to catch on with his idea of doing it on Friday nights in the Northeast, and from video knew he was probably into martial arts. But that doesn't exactly narrow it down. Dumb luck. Some random kids stumbled upon his buried cache of things like a gun, gloves, mask, cash, etc. in the woods. They turn it over to the cops, and that's how they ended up finding out who he was. The FBI gave him some deal where he worked with them and banks on telling them how to prevent bank robberies. From video knew he was probably into martial arts. I earned this black belt, and I ain't taking it off ever. Quote, I just imagined he was kicking and punching the air. Harold Shipman, seemingly a normal GP, turns out to be a prolific serial killer with maybe up to 250 victims over his career. Only discovered when a hospital worker was concerned about the number of cremation forms they had to process for his elderly patients. So very close to going undetected. Damn, he had to be killing a lot of people for the amount of dying elderly people to be suspicious. It's not that he killed them, it's that he cremated them. I thought it was because he was changing their wills to make him the beneficiary and a relative. Cottoned on. You're both right. A drive became suspicious in the number of cremation certificates. But police were unable to find sufficient evidence. After the investigation closed, Shipman killed 3 more people. The final nail in the coffin, so to speak, is what you are speaking of, where he tried to make himself the sole beneficiary of a former mayor. So, it was the will manipulation that got him caught. But he was under suspicion beforehand with the cremation certificates. I knew a guy who got into selling drugs on the dark web. He had this setup where he'd buy the drugs and package them in his room, ship them through USPS, and collect money through cryptocurrency. He made a lot of money. Went on for a while without being caught. They even found fictionalized accounts he wrote about how he was able to do this, including driving 50 miles to make drops. He was caught when an employee noticed he was handling large numbers of small envelopes while wearing latex gloves and reported it. He probably would have gotten away with it if he'd worn winter gloves over the latex. Shit, that's a good tip. Thanks. That'd be a great mystery novel clue. Why are these letters only being sent in the winter? So the perpetrator can use a mailbox wearing gloves without arousing suspicion. Probably the DC snipers. They couldn't convince the police to talk to them because they were swamped with fake callers. So the snipers told them to look into a murder in another state. This started the chain of events to them being found out, but before that the police had nothing. Nothing. The public was absolutely terrified and the police had no clue who was responsible. The You're Wrong About podcast did a fantastic job telling this story. I remember how people were on the lookout for a white van for days, weeks. Closing parenthesis. And then it turned out to be a dark-colored car where they hid in the trunk. Holy shit. Trauma unlocked. I'd forgotten all about the DC snipers. The DC snipers story is one of those things that has kind of been forgotten about, but it was absolutely insane when it happened. I remember them telling people to constantly move their head around while pumping gas. I recall a few gas stations setting up big tarps to shield drivers as they nervously pumped gas. I mean, I like it and would def take the tarp cover versus a pump without. This detail from Wikipedia is crazy to me. On August 1, 2002, John Gator, 51, was changing a tire slashed by Malvo at a parking lot in Hammond, Louisiana. Malvo then shot him in the neck. 11. The bullet exited through Gator's back, and he pretended to be dead while Malvo stole his wallet. Gator ran to a service station after Malvo left and discovered that he was bleeding. He went to a hospital and was released within an hour. On March 1, 2010, he received a letter of apology from Malvo. 12. How do human bodies even work?